The scripture this morning is from Exodus chapter 2, verses 11 through 15, Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 12, 24, verses 18, and chapter 34, verses 29 to 30. One day, after Moses was grown up, he went out to his people and saw their forced labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsfolk. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, he saw two Hebrews fighting. He said to the one who was in the wrong, "Why do you strike your fellow Hebrew?" He answered, "Who made you a ruler and judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "Surely the thing is known." When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh. He settled in the land of Midian and sat down by a well. Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led his flock beyond the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. Then Moses said, "I must turn aside and look at this great sight, and see why the bush is not burned up." When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses!" And he said, "Here I am." Then he said, "Come no closer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you stand is holy ground." He said further, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, "I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings. I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians, and to bring them out of the land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the country of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. The cry of the Israelites has now come to me. I have also seen how the Egyptians oppressed them. So, come, I will send you to the Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" He said, "I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that is I who sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God on this mountain." Moses entered the cloud and went up on the mountain. Moses was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. Moses came down from Mount Sinai, and as he came down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the covenant in his hands, Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone because he had been talking with God. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, the skin of his face was shining. They were afraid to come near him. The word of God for the people of God.
Thank you, Jenny. Well, my friends, just a reminder, if you look in your programs, there are green sheets, and in those green sheets are growth questions that you can use to reflect on this morning's message after you leave this place. There are also household prayers you can use, at home if you would find that helpful. So today we're continuing our Pixar sermon series, and over the past several weeks, we've been looking at truths about life and about faith as they're expressed not only in Scripture, but also in the Pixar movies. And if you've missed any of them, you can find them on our website, peoplesumc.org, and there we have the different messages, and we had fun with Monsters, Inc. and The Incredibles, and as you saw, Bug's Life, you can check them out there. Today we're looking at the movie Cars. Now, in Cars, for those of you who haven't seen it, Lightning McQueen is a hot, cocky rookie race car who believes he is the greatest thing since sliced bread. In fact, he's vying for the championship. The Piston Cup is the cup that they're racing for, and the winner of the Piston Cup is going to be getting the hottest sponsors ever, the sponsors with the most money. And you know what? Lightning believes he's already has this thing won. And his mind is on what his life will look like after everything comes his way. Let's take a peek at that clip. So that's before he wins it, and that's all his dreams of what his life is going to look like, which includes even fighting aliens. Now, the only thing between him and his dream is a tiebreaker race with two other cars on the other side of the country. If he wins, the sponsorship in his dream life is his. On his way there, he runs into trouble late one night. The semi truck that is taking him there starts to fall asleep because Lightning wants to get across the country first and urges him to keep pushing on. And he falls out of the truck, and race cars don't have headlights, and so he's in the pitch black trying to find his way, and he gets lost late at night, and he ends up tearing up a small town before passing out. And this is what he wakes up to. So Lightning McQueen's life takes an unexpected turn, and he ends up kind of in a dark place, held back from his dream in this podunk little town. Now, Lightning McQueen's story up to this point reminds me a bit of Moses' story, which Jenny shared excerpts of this morning. And Moses' life wasn't headed towards riches. Moses already had riches. He grew up in Pharaoh's court, and yet he couldn't forget his true heritage, that he was really a Hebrew. So when one of the Hebrews was being beaten by an Egyptian overseer, Moses looked around and saw no one and killed the Egyptian who was beating the Hebrew. Well, the next day when Moses finds out that someone had seen him and word gets back to the Pharaoh, he goes into exile, finally settling down in a land called Midian. Now, like Lightning McQueen, this is not what Moses expected for his life, and he ends up in a pretty dark place, a murderer living in hiding. All right, that's a little dark than Lightning McQueen's story, but you kind of get the point I'm trying to make. Well, this morning, I'd like to argue that God dwells in deep darkness. which may seem odd to us at first, because we often think of God as the God of light. But God also comes to people in dark clouds, dark nights, both literal and figurative, and in dark strangers. God does some of God's best work in the dark. If this is hard to see, then it's maybe because we've been conditioned to see darkness as a negative thing. Think about all of the ways that we speak of darkness. That film, it was really dark. Oh, she's in a dark mood. I'm sorry, I'm in a dark place right now. Luke, come to the dark side. All right, I had to throw that in. That doesn't really fit, but the only phrases that are uttered that are really positive about darkness seem to be about dark chocolate and dark beer. But the truth is, I can't think of anyone praying, "Dear God, please send more darkness into my life." Or, "Oh Lord, please help me to be in a dark place so I can see you more clearly." Any of you prayed that kind of prayer before? I certainly haven't. No one really asks for that in the Bible either. But you know what? It happens all of the time throughout Scripture. God shows up in Moses' dark place in a burning bush this morning. But it's not just Moses who experiences God in a dark place in his life. God comes to Abraham, the father of Israel, in the dark, telling the old man late at night to make a sacrifice. And it's there in that darkness that God makes his covenant with Abraham. God comes to Jacob in the dark, not once, but twice. The first time in a dream, and the second time on a riverbank, where a man who isn't quite a man wrestles with him all night long. And morning light puts an end to it, but before the man goes, he gives Jacob a new name, a blessing, and a permanent limp. Once you start noticing how many things happen in the night and in dark places in the Bible, the list starts growing really fast. Not only does God come to Moses when he's in a dark place, but God and Moses lead the Hebrew people out of slavery in the middle of the night. God parts the Red Sea at night. And that's just the beginning. When God decides to enter into a covenant with the Hebrew people after they've escaped slavery in Egypt, it does happen in the full light of day, but God comes to them in the midst of a dark, dense cloud. And when the people see this dark, dense cloud and hear God's thundering voice in that darkness, they decide that they don't want to get anywhere near that dark cloud, so they ask Moses to go into that cloud on their behalf. And so Moses enters that cloud for 40 days and 40 nights. And when he comes out, his skin is so shiny from being in God's presence that the people are afraid to go near Moses. So they have Moses darken his face with a veil to protect the people from God's reflected glory. It's not a popular truth, but there it is. God dwells in deep darkness. Ask someone who's gone through a deep tragedy in their lives. When we cannot see, when we're not sure where we're going, and when all of our old landmarks have vanished in the darkness, sometimes that's when God comes to us and meets us. And truth be told, there's all sorts of benefits to this kind of faith, of meeting God in the darkness, although they don't sound all that appealing to us before we're living them. The first benefit is, when we're in the darkness, we have to slow way down. All of those things you prided yourself on outside of the darkness, your speed, your agility, your ability to figure things out in a single glance, they don't do you any good in the dark. You might as well crawl like a baby, because at least then you can't fall down and stumble because you're already on the ground in the darkness. And the good news is slowness has a lot going for it. There's time to use those senses that we don't use because our eyes aren't working so well. There's time to wonder where you think you're going and why. There's even time to let the feelings we've been trying to outrun finally catch up to us. Another benefit is you begin to see how a shabby faith based on benefits really is. Inside the darkness, with things slowed way down, so that you are more in touch with than you may want to be. The good news is that you can see very clearly how much of your life strategy has been designed to get you where you want to go. And then therefore to get a handle on God while you're at it, so that you can figure out how to get God to help you to get to where you want to go. In the darkness, with our lives broken into pieces, when we can't even see, instead of doing that other thing, we often turn to God with our lives in our hands and say, "Here, do anything you absolutely want with this, with my life." I know. You know what? This thing will never sell. It will not attract the masses, except for the people who are already sitting in the dark. Those people who think they've already done something wrong, that God has abandoned them, that they've already lost their way and may never find it again. To hear the gospel that God dwells in the darkness, that might actually fill them with hope, along with any of us who are listening in. Because if we haven't been there in the dark yet, friends, we will be. No one who follows Jesus gets a rain check. No one who's a human being gets to bypass the dark cloud their entire lives. But here's the thing about the cloud of unknowing. It's not there to get through like a test or a fever. It's God's home. It's the place where God dwells. To be invited in is a great honor. Those who come out can be hard to look at and leave us wondering, where did all of that brightness come from out of that dark place? They may not even have the words to describe where they've been, but they may just tell you this. They may not have chosen that darkness in a million years. But now that it has happened, they'd never give it back.